What do you think was the biggest testimony we got this week? I know they introduced some police interrogation tapes that we had never seen before. It definitely seemed like the cops knew early on he had changed outfits on the day of the murder and that he wasn't necessarily being forthcoming about that. They showed him the Snapchat video his son Paul, a murder victim, one of the two, had taken, in which you can hear Alex's voice. Like, they seem to know Alec was guilty, or at least a suspect early on. But what stood out to you as like the most interesting piece of evidence introduced this week?
So if we're talking this week, the biggest piece of evidence is definitely that video that puts him at the scene at 8:44, which is right around when the murders occurred. But this week, to me, and I'm on an island a little bit talking about this case because, you know, as a lawyer looking at our criminal justice system, beyond a reasonable doubt is important, and prosecutors need to be held to that standard. And this was one of the worst investigations I've ever seen for SLED. Now, why that happened, who knows? Alex connections, was it a good old boys club? Were they trying not to let it happen? Or did they just drop the ball? I don't know. But the most important evidence this week was from the lead investigator. I think Owen was his last name. And during the cross-examination, they basically went through the entire defense's theory of the case, how they really didn't do anything that they were supposed to in this case. They didn't protect the crime scene. People were walking through it. There was law enforcement bloody footsteps throughout. They didn't search the house appropriately. They just kind of walked through and didn't gather any real evidence. They didn't search the mom's house, which was his entire alibi. He said he was at the mom's house when the murders occurred. They never searched it, and he was letting them he was cooperating fully with them. They had this video where you mentioned he had different clothes on. That seems really important to you or I, right? So it would be important to try to find those clothes, right? We find out they never did anything to try to find those clothes. They never asked where those clothes were. They never looked for those clothes. Yeah, they never found them, but that's because they never looked for them. And when we talk about the missing weapons, they didn't walk the 16-minute drive from Moselle, where the murders occurred, to the mom's house in Alameda. They dropped the ball left and right. And even so far as to say, they thought the white shirt that we all know now has no blood, basically, and no DNA on it. An expert said there was blood spatter. The chief lead investigator told the grand jury there was blood spatter to indict Alex Murdaugh. Now we know, confirmed by state witnesses, there was no blood spatter on that shirt, which is why it seems like they've kind of switched their angle to he must have changed, because for a long time in this investigation, they thought that white shirt he was wearing that looked so clean to the naked eye had blood spatter on it to prove that he must have been close enough to pull the trigger to get the blood or biological material on his shirt. The investigation was pretty piss poor, if you ask me.
The SLED maintenance of the murder scene in the wake of the crime was absolutely abhorrent. They've done a good job of bringing that out, even through the state's witnesses. And you raise a good question about why. Why is that? Because Alex Murdaugh is a very, very well-connected man. His family basically ran this town for a century. And there might have been let's take care of him, and not suspecting him. But soon they got onto his trail. And we're hearing some of that in the examinations of Alex Murdaugh. Hasn't taken the stand, but he did give interviews. And this one was from August 11th, 2021. That's 2 months after the murders, where they're asking him about the Snapchat video that his son took, that Alec clearly did not know that his son had taken this Snapchat video of him. There's two videos. There's one in which Paul, the murder victim, is handling dogs. And you can clearly hear Alec in the background. It places Alec at the dog kennels where the murders took place, something Alec denied he'd ever went to on the day of the murder. And then there's a Snapchat video that shows Alex Murdaugh with his son on scene the day of the murder in a different outfit from the one that he would later be talking to police in.
So every time he's confronted with something like this, he starts asking law enforcement questions like, when was that? When was that video? And they're saying, well, it was at dusk because it was still kind of light out. I thought you told us you changed. He's like, I thought I would have changed before then. They're like, well, clearly you didn't change before then. So when did you change? And he would ask them a lot of questions, again, very clearly trying to put together his alibi. Problem is, I think law enforcement could have blown it out of the water if they would have done a proper investigation, because it seems like that's exactly what he was doing, putting this alibi together, talking to witnesses after the fact, trying to get stories straight. After he's confronted with this, he goes and talks to Blanca about what shirt he was wearing that day to try to get their story straight. Shelly Smith, the caregiver, he's trying to get how long he was at mom's house for to try to get the story straight. But I think the prosecution and SLED mostly dropped the ball by not actually looking in to each of these problems when they actually had an opportunity to right after the murders occurred. And so the defense is making it look like you guys can't prove anything. There's all these possibilities and could have happened and would have happened and maybe happened, but you haven't proved anything beyond a reasonable doubt. And I think they actually have, for as bad of a character as Alex Murdaugh is, for these murder charges, I think they actually have a pretty decent argument that there is reasonable doubt in this case.
Oh my goodness. All right, wait, we have our SOT 18. Let's listen.
There is a video on Paul's phone of you and him on the farm that night. And you were in khaki pants and a dress shirt. You were playing with a tree. But I mean, the question in that is, when I met you that night, you were in shorts and a t-shirt. At what point in that evening did you change clothes?
I'm not sure. It would have been...
Before dinner or after dinner?
No, it would have been... What time of day was that? I would have thought I'd already changed.
There's not a time, but I want to say it looks to be about dusk. So that would have been 7:30, 8 o'clock.
I guess I changed when I got back to the house.
That change of clothes is going to be important. There was a change of clothes. His defense is going to argue, it was hot, it's South Carolina, he was doing yard work, he changed, but you could see he's on his heels there. He didn't realize there was a video showing the change of clothing. We've had testimony by the housekeeper finding the shower and the wet towel in the house, and those clothes, the first clothes have never been found. And you say the prosecution, they should have introduced something about it, it's their burden of proof. But, the truth is, for us, if he's really innocent, why wouldn't he just go find those clothes and say, here they are. They have no blood on them. He doesn't have the burden of proof, but you and I know as commentators, if he had those clean clothes with no blood on them, we'd be seeing them.
Yeah, and some other stuff has come out that potentially could be good for them that's coming out during the trial with some of his GM data on his car. And I believe you're right about that, but this was an exact question asked to Agent Owens in, I think, redirect, where he said, they didn't tell you to go search Alameda, which was where he was during his alibi, the mother's house. They didn't give you the clothes, things like that. And then on recross, the defense attorney made a good point. Is it the suspect's job to do this investigation for you? And I think in closing argument, we've made closing arguments like this in cases where we've defended in criminal defense cases where they can sit there and point the finger at us all day. But if they didn't do their job and prove the case, the law says you've got to come back with not guilty if you have reasonable doubt based on that. And that's the big issue in this case. We can sit here and he's going to prison for the rest of his life. We have seen the financial crimes evidence entered into this case. Slam dunk. Absolutely beyond a reasonable doubt, he's going to get convicted for those. So he's going to prison forever. I'm just not so sure they can prove he did this.
Look, you did the tough thing during COVID. You paid your people and pulled your business through the pandemic. And now doing the tough thing could qualify you for up to $26,000 per employee at covidtaxrelief.org. Government funds are available right now to reward companies with 2 or more employees who stayed open during COVID. This is not a loan, and you don't have to pay it back. The program's complicated, but no one knows more about it than the CPAs and tax experts at covidtaxrelief.org. You pay nothing up front, they do all the work, and then they share a percentage of the cash they get you. Businesses of all types, including nonprofits and churches, can qualify, including those who took PPP loans, even if you had increases in sales. You did the tough thing for your employees during COVID. Let covidtaxrelief.org help you. In particular, help you get up to $26,000 per employee. Visit covidtaxrelief.org, covidtaxrelief.org, covidtaxrelief.org. Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.